to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks so much. Good evening again. My name is Jamie Mogul. And again, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, we're so glad you could be with us tonight in this virtual world that we're living in. And of course, we hope that you and your families are all safe. We're here tonight for the State House District 165th District. I'll be moderating the forum tonight. And it's important to let you know right off the bat that the League is a nonpartisan organization. This means we neither support nor oppose candidates. We are dedicated to ensuring that all eligible voters have the opportunity and the information they need to exercise their right to vote without impediments. And a special acknowledgement of the 100th anniversary of the League of Women Voters and the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Please consider joining the League, whether it be in your area or as a member at large. Forums like this or all of our important information on vote411.org wouldn't be possible without the support of our communities and members like you. So you're joining us through the web. We're doing these virtual forums now. So we're not in an auditorium as we normally would be, but the rules are pretty much the same. And we've met previously with the candidates. And so I want to thank also the leagues of Central Delaware County and for Radnor for organizing and overseeing this candidate forum that is going live via Zoom. The candidates and myself and the team were via Zoom, and we're on YouTube also. So you can submit questions live. So somebody will be moderating those questions and submitting them to me. So please do submit your questions. Tonight's format will follow similar procedures as if we were live, like I said, with the candidates already receiving the rules and knowing who will be first and last to speak following a coin toss. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for their opening and closing statements. As time allows, we will ask the same question to each candidate, going back and forth. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer each question with 2 opportunities to extend their time with responses of 30 seconds. Or a rebuttal of 30 seconds. They will visibly raise their hand so I can see them to allow for that extra time. We ask that you listen, and if you have a question, again, please submit it through the YouTube live chat. We'll be monitoring those questions, of course. The entire forum is being recorded for posting and viewing on the League websites and YouTube channels and public television venues like Mainline TV Network. It must be shown in its entirety. Clips cannot be used in excerpted form for partisan political advantage. Candidates will be made aware of time via the timekeeper, and the candidates, I'd like to introduce them. I guess you could just give a wave. For PA State Representative for the 165th, the incumbent Jennifer O'Mara, and the challenger Bob Smythe. Gonna give a wave there, Bob, thanks. And they've agreed that I can call them Jen and Bob tonight. We agreed upon that earlier. And so thank you both so much for being here tonight and agreeing to this format. So I'll begin with the opening statements. And we did a coin toss and Bob is going first. I'll give you the floor, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you to the League for setting and hosting this event. And thank you to my opponent, Representative O'Mara, for giving me this opportunity. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bob Smythe, and I'm the Republican candidate for the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in the 165th Legislative District. Over the last few months, I've met thousands of residents of the district. And the most common first question I get is, why in the world would you want to enter politics nowadays? It's a very important question. The answer to that question has a lot to do with how I was raised. And a great example of how I was raised is a story about when I was about 11 or 12 years old. My father woke me up one morning and told me I had to give him a hand fixing a door. What I didn't know was it wasn't our door. It was the door of a very sweet, widowed elderly woman in Darby Borough, where he served and still serves as police chief. We spent all day fixing this door. In reality, he fixed most of it, but at the end of the day on the way home, I asked him why we had done that. And he told me because she needed help, because we could help her, and because nobody else was going to. That's just one example of a whole lifetime of lessons that have driven me to be the person that I am today. Those lessons drove me to Westchester University, where I earned a degree in history and a teaching certificate. And they drove me to a 10-year career as a classroom educator in some of our county's most economically disadvantaged communities. Those lessons drove me to join the Springfield Fire Company at 16 years old, where I still serve as captain. And those life lessons drove me here tonight, seeking this office. I, like many of the residents, are tired of officials making empty promises, telling us what we want to hear, and doing something else. I'm tired of excuses. I'm tired of political blame games, and the same issues remaining in our community unresolved. I'm here tonight because I believe I can help those frustrations and work towards solutions for our communities. I'm somebody who says what they mean and delivers results. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Bob. And Jen, I'll let you go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you to the League for organizing tonight's event. I first ran for office in 2018. I was never involved with politics before that, but I saw a government that wasn't working for the people, and I wanted to do something about that. Now, when I first ran, it wasn't a global pandemic, and I knocked on thousands of doors. And the one thing I heard from residents over and over again was that they didn't understand what their state representative could do for them beyond go to Harrisburg and pass laws. When I got elected, I made a commitment that I would work for everyone in this district, regardless of political affiliations. And my office has done that. In my first term, we had over 50 events, including 9 town halls, and a Veterans Expo, and a Senior Expo. And so many that I was actually named one of the 11 most accessible legislators in the country. In Harrisburg, I've had success because I've been willing to reach across the aisle in a bipartisan way to get things done. I had a bill get signed into law to add funds to the Veterans Trust Fund. I co-founded the Bipartisan Student Debt Caucus to help do something about the rising cost of education in our state. And I'm also proud to be the co-chair of the Fire and Emergency Services Caucus, working to improve the lives of our first responders. There is still a lot of work left to be done. But the one thing that you can count on with me is, regardless of if we agree on every issue or not, I am always going to be honest with you. I'm always going to be transparent. I'm always going to work my hardest. And I'm going to make sure my office is filled with people who are ready to work for you. We have helped thousands of residents in the 165th over the last few months, really over the last 2 years. And I'm excited to continue doing that work. If you reelect me, you can count on having a strong team here to support you and to keep working for you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jen. All right, well, we're going to get right into it because we don't have a lot of time, but we've gotten a lot of questions. And we've agreed before, I think we'll start with Jen, and then we'll go to Bob, and then we'll go back and forth with the questions. And again, remember, it's not 2 minutes, it's 90 minutes responses, all right?
90 seconds, not 90
90
minutes.
seconds, yes, please, not 90 minutes. We'd be here all night. Thanks, Jen. Okay, so I think we'll get right into it. There are, and Bob or anybody, if you need me to repeat the question when it's your turn, please, please note that. There are many bills introduced by legislators each year in Harrisburg. Few of them are ever enacted. What would you do to improve the productivity of our legislative branch?
Well, it's a good question and it's a good point. And it's something that I'm frustrated by myself as a new member in Harrisburg. I think often what we see in Harrisburg is an unwillingness to work together. The bills that do pass are usually bipartisan bills, and they're usually passed unanimously, which means it isn't until we find an issue that we agree upon that we're going to get a bill to the finish line. So I think it's incumbent upon me and other elected officials that we work together, that we put partisanship aside, we find issues that we can agree on. We know there's not going to be every single issue we can find a compromise on, but there are plenty, and we have to do a better job at that. And that's something that I definitely think my colleagues in Harrisburg need to work on as well.
Thanks. And I'll turn it to you, Bob.
The gridlock that takes place in Harrisburg and in government is definitely something that frustrates myself and many of the folks that I've met as I've been out campaigning. I think the key is legislation has to be something that can be paid for. We have to vote for funding in the budget. That's extremely significant. If the funds aren't there that the bill requires, right, that has a large factor in determining its effectiveness and whether or not it's going to pass. So that's a key part. But really what it comes down to is building bridges and working with folks who think differently than you do. And I think that's something that we need to bring back to government. That's certainly something that I've done throughout my life. I've worked in a number of different communities that are very different than the one that I grew up in. And I have a background of working with folks who think very differently than myself. You know, in the fire service, when there's an emergency, when there's a problem, you know, we don't stand around and talk about who comes from where and what company and all that. We work together to resolve the issue at hand. And that's the type of collaboration that I believe we need to see in Harrisburg and that the people in our district need, want, and deserve. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, so again, we flip time. So Bob, you'll be going first now. And let's see. Just trying to give a variety of questions. We've gotten a lot of great questions.
Take your time.
Recently, the state of California has been seeing devastating wildfires. On Tuesday, it was reported that the smoke from these fires reached us on the East Coast. Environmental and climate issues are American issues. What is your plan to better protect Pennsylvania's open spaces, land, and combat the threat of climate change?
First off, I want to say that I'm praying for the first responders in California. There's a lot of folks out there that are risking their lives right now to protect the property and the people in those areas. And I wish them all the best safety and health. When it comes to open spaces, I'm someone that believes in open spaces in our district. I think we need funding to grow greener areas and preserve open spaces. When it comes to climate change, I believe that climate change is absolutely real. And my concern with climate change and addressing it is we need to make sure that it is a unified approach, not just across the state of Pennsylvania, but across the United States and really across the world. Because even if we do the best job that we can do in the state of Pennsylvania, in the district and in the state, that's not going to make a bit of difference unless everybody's on the same page with this. And that goes back to what we just talked about, breaking down barriers, building bridges, and working together. And I believe that we can do that. And I believe that the majority of folks in this state agree that climate change is real and we need to address it. And, you know, I'd like to see the state invest more in renewable energy. So it's a big issue, and it's unfortunate what's happening in California right now. And I just, again, I pray for the folks that are out there on the front line of that.
Thanks so much. And Jen, I'll turn to you.
Thank you, Jamie. And it's a great question. And beyond the devastating impact we're seeing in California, we're seeing the impact of climate change here in our own communities. This summer, we had hurricanes wipe out power in neighborhoods. Tornado watches have become a new normal here in Delaware County. And unfortunately in Harrisburg, there are people who still deny climate change and who still say that it's not real. And that is, unfortunately, right now, the party in charge. While I've been in Harrisburg, I have been supportive of 100% renewable energy. That bill has over 102 sponsors, but we haven't been able to get it to run, unfortunately. I've supported Pennsylvania joining RGGI, which has an impact in pulling carbon out of the air and also bringing jobs to our state. And I also believe we need to invest in infrastructure in our area. And we need to invest in green infrastructure. We have areas in Marple and Radnor where stormwater, in Springfield even, where stormwater is a huge issue. And so we need to start making important infrastructure investments. And unfortunately, last year, in 2019, we cut the Department of Transportation budget by 30%, which that's where and we're not seeing that investment get made. So we really need to focus. Climate change is happening, and it's happening now. And it's important that we make.
Thanks, Jen. And I'll say, just be careful. I lost you a little bit on the internet. I think we could still hear you, but of course we're living in this virtual world now. So we want to make sure that we hear both of you and we hear your answers. So I'll let you know if it goes out. Okay. I don't know what to do with that, with the router or so forth, but our tech team will tell me. Okay. So we'll get to the next questions. And again, Jen, you'll go first. We're flipping back and forth. And again, these are all questions that we've had submitted to us. So they're not particularly questions. So they're your future constituents or current constituents. This one has to do with the economic fallout of COVID and what we're dealing with. And this person has said, I'm concerned about local small businesses, specifically their viability and solvency going forward. What is your stance on the lockdown on businesses? As a leader in the community, what do you say to these small business owners when their livelihood is dependent on staying open, especially given the small margins they already operate under? And then the overall question is, what can you do for these small businesses to make sure that they stay open?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's a great question. It has been devastating to see the impact that this virus has had on our economy and on our local businesses. I have been supportive of efforts to try to get grants and direct financial resources to our small business owners. I hosted webinars to try to teach small business owners how to apply for the grant program that was established. I worked with the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce to create the Christmas in July concept that we had this summer to try to drive out small business, really get people to shop local once things started reopening. And now that things are mostly reopened, the last industry we really are working on is getting restaurants to full capacity because we know it's not sustainable. But at the end of the day, we also know that we have to make sure we're dealing with COVID. And unfortunately, this area was hit really hard. And that has been a real problem. Unfortunately, also in Harrisburg, rather than running bills where we were actually establishing resources to help small business owners, we were bickering. And that's part of the gridlock that has to change. And it was something that I was calling out for to change on the House floor. But I want to make sure that I'm here to help small business owners whenever they need support. And my office is, we always have the door open if there's any way we can help. Just this weekend, I heard from a small business owner and I went to visit, and now we're starting small business spotlights. And I will be back next week.
I'm so glad this question was asked. It's definitely one of the most important issues in the district right now. And I applaud Representative O'Meara for saying that she's passionate about supporting local businesses. I would encourage her in the future to vote in support of bills that allow our local economy to open up. Unfortunately, every opportunity that she's had in the last 3 to 4 months, she's voted to continue the lockdown and been in step with the Wolf administration's policy of picking winners and losers. I understand that the COVID-19 virus is real. I understand that better than most people because as a first responder, I'm on the front line of that. That being said, the damage that we're doing to the local economy is having its own negative impact on the health and sustainability of the people in this district. This is a very serious problem that we are entering into. I have met an untold amount of folks who are unable to keep their business alive because of the decisions that have been made at the legislature. I have run into people who are terrified that they're not going to be able to pay their bills, people who aren't getting their unemployment assistance. This the Wolf administration, which our current representative has supported, has completely been inequitable and non-transparent with the way that our response to this pandemic has been held or executed.
Thank you for acknowledging that your time was up. And do remember, you both each have those additional 30 seconds if you'd like to use them. But I'm going to continue on and maybe ask you something about a different issue. And this, I think, first we'll have Bob answer. And we'll go into a very basic question that somebody has asked. How will you keep our communities safe from gun violence?
That's also an excellent question. I appreciate that. Gun violence is an issue plaguing the state. I am a firm believer in the Second Amendment, and I support our constitutional right to own and bear firearms. Now, that being said, I do understand that it is a very significant job of our government to keep firearms out of the hands of criminals. And I believe that we need to do a better job of enforcing the laws that we have on the books. I believe in common sense gun legislation, like background checks. I do believe we need to take a look at closing some of the loopholes that do exist when it comes to gun legislation. But I also believe that sometimes when it comes to the problems that we have, not just in this state, but in this country, we work really hard at addressing the symptom of the issue as opposed to the issue. And I think a lot of times when it comes to gun violence, there is a bigger issue that's not getting addressed, okay? Like mental health, for example, things like that. And certainly everything that's going on right now with the lockdown and the impending economic crisis, that's causing a real issue for the mental health of the folks in this state and in our district. And so we need to address those problems, right? Guns are a piece of the pie. And if we don't solve the root cause, it's not going to do anything to address the real issue in our communities when it comes to violence.
Thank you. I'll let you go, Jen.
Thank you. So gun violence is a real issue that is impacting our communities right now. I know because I was personally impacted by this. I lost my dad to gun suicide, and 2/3 of gun deaths in this country are actually suicide. 3 months into being elected, I got a phone call that a woman was murdered. She was shot and killed inside of a Wawa on Lancaster Avenue in Radnor. And that was one of the darkest days I've ever had. It was devastating. And there is a lot that we can do to both protect the Second Amendment. Full disclosure, my husband and I own firearms, but also make sure that they don't end up in the wrong hands. And that starts with mandating lost and stolen reporting, with having universal background checks. It also includes bringing things to Pennsylvania like ERPOs. I actually stood with the former DA, Kat Copeland, and Rep. Todd Stevens, a Republican from Montgomery County, after the woman was murdered in our district, to call for Pennsylvania to pass extreme risk protection orders. And the key thing about that, prosecutor, our bill has been approved by the ACLU to protect due process, one of the few states in the country where that has happened. And I think there's a lot we can do to stop gun violence and also address other issues. But we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And that starts with changing laws that are very important.
Just Jen, to be careful, I lost you a little bit at the end there, but I think we got the essence of it. We're dealing with technology, but we heard you most of your answer. So now you will be the next step, and we've gotten a question here. Do you fundamentally agree with the issues that the Black Lives Matter movement is highlighting and fighting to change?
Well, I definitely agree that racism is real and it's a problem that we need to address in our country. But I also want to be clear that I support Black Lives Matter, and I also support our local police. And I do not think those two things cannot be synonymous with one another. And that starts by making sure that we have important conversations in our community. A few weeks ago, I actually organized, at the request of residents and officials in Morton, an outdoor town hall where residents were able to talk directly to the police chief about issues they were facing in their community. And it led to important conversations. And now we're going to continue that work and talk about doing diversity training in the community. But I also want to make sure we address racism in different ways, right? It isn't just with policing. We know that Black women are more likely to die during childbirth. We know that African Americans are more likely to be incarcerated and for longer sentences than white Americans. We know that African Americans make 25% less than white Americans. And we know that economic equity issues like raising the minimum wage would be a huge start at addressing systemic racism, because more often than not is African American members of our community who are stuck in jobs that are paying that little wage. So there is a lot of work that we need to do in Harrisburg and here in our community to make sure we have full equity for the Black and brown members of our community.
Thanks. And I'll turn to you, Bob.
Jamie, can you repeat the question real quick?
Sure. The question we got was, do you fundamentally agree with the issues that the Black Lives Matter movement is highlighting and fighting to change? Okay.
So I absolutely agree that Black Lives Matter. And I agree with a lot of what's going on in the movement. As a career classroom educator, I have worked for the last 10 years predominantly in Black and brown communities. And though I am not a person of color, having worked in those communities for as long as I have, serving those children and those families, I feel as though I understand some of the struggles that the folks in those communities have, more so than the average person in my situation as a white person from a suburban community. We can do better in this country and in our communities to live up to the ideals that are at the foundation of this great country. That said, what I do not support is the Black Lives Matter organization or its leadership. And the reason is Representative Omer did a great job of illustrating a number of the issues facing the Black community, issues of inequity. And I don't hear a lot of those issues from the organization and its leadership. They seem to be hyper-focused on certain things that aren't, in my opinion, in the best interest of those communities. So I do absolutely believe that Black Lives Matter. I believe that all Black lives matter. Black children, Black police officers, and I also fully support our local law enforcement. And I also agree with Representative Omer that those two things can be done at the same time. And I believe that many of the folks in our community feel the same way.
Thanks. And thanks to you both for recognizing the timing and being cognizant of that. We're going to switch gears and talk about our schools, which you were both kind of highlighting, but we'll get right to it. And Bob, I'll ask you, we got a question here. PA schools are underfunded. How would you address this problem?
Great question. So what a lot of folks don't realize when it comes to issues of funding in the state of Pennsylvania is how the funding works. A lot of our funding, when we talk about fair funding, I believe that our funding in schools need to be structured based on population. Okay, a lot of the western part of our state receives funding based on populations that they don't have anymore. Their populations are going down, ours are increasing, and yet we still have less funding than they do. So that's an issue. And I believe that a lot of it comes down to the budget, right? And I don't understand how we can address issues of public education funding when we're not voting for the budget like Representative Omer did on both opportunities, particularly the last budget, the 5-month emergency budget, which had the only line item that it guaranteed full funding for was public education. And I could tell you as a public school teacher, that would have been catastrophic had we not passed that budget. So I'm very thankful that it did pass. And I want to say one more thing about education. Right now, our students vast majority of them are learning virtually. And some of the issues that we're struggling with tonight technologically, right, This is what's going on in the classrooms. It's a struggle. The education that they need and deserve, right? We're struggling to deliver it because of the barriers that are being put in place. I understand the virus is real, but this is a problem that we're going to have to deal with after this is done.
Okay, Jen?
Thank you, Jamie. Bob is correct about the fair funding formula. Currently, only 12% of funding moves through that formula, which would base funding based on population, not an outdated formula based in the 80s. At that rate, our schools in the 165th only get about 15 to 17% of their funding from the state. If we were able to move all 100% of funds through, which myself and my Democratic colleagues have wanted and tried to do this session, but we've been blocked, unfortunately, by the majority in Harrisburg, our schools, Radnor would see an increase of 78% of funding, Springfield would see an increase of 57% of funding, and Marple Newtown would see an increase of 8%. But I want to address one thing that Bob brought up, which is the budget. And I want to address an inaccuracy that he has been putting out there. The budget, it consists of more than one bill. And the bill that I voted against was the first part of the budget, which is the general appropriation. And the reason I voted against that bill is because as it was written before it left the House, it had a gap of $300 million for the homestead deduction, which meant every house in our district would have seen an increase in property taxes ranging from $135 to $300. That is something that I do not think our working families could afford. Luckily, because so many of us, including 6 Republicans, or maybe it ended up being 3 because they changed their vote at the end, voted no, and we got that $300 million back. And so I voted yes on the 3 remaining codes of the budget, which were the school code, which spent the money.
Thank you. And Bob is showing us he would like to use his 30 seconds. So I'll just let the timer know. Bob, go ahead.
I appreciate what Representative Mayer said, and it is true that she voted for the second part of the legislation with the Homestead Exemption Act. The unfortunate issue is that that vote took place the same day as the budget issue. And I understand that no budget's perfect. I understand that there isn't just one line item in a budget, but no budget is perfect. And when it comes to the education of our children, that's where the money comes from. If that budget doesn't pass, that money doesn't happen. And so that is the only bill that you are constitutionally required to pass as a legislator is the budget. 2 no votes.
Your time was up.
Jen, please be cognizant of time, both of you. Thank you. Following up on that question, you both have noted a bit, so I'm going to go with continue with the school-related questions. And so, Bob, this would go toward to you. And we got a question here. What should or if Harrisburg be doing to support school districts that are struggling to be effective during the pandemic?
So there's a number of things that can be done. There are some things that are being done that are very crucial. I mean, we do have significant access to PPE and supports like that. So that's good. A lot of that comes from that CARES money from the federal government. But when it comes to the pandemic, I really would like to see legislation passed that protects school districts when it comes to legal liability and things like that. And really what we need to do when it comes to supporting schools during this pandemic is really what we need to do to better support schools in general. And that is, we need to listen to our educators. We need to entrust them to advise us on what they need instead of telling them what to do and what they need. We have people making decisions when it comes to education who have no experience in education, have never set foot in a classroom, and yet they're dictating to our teachers what to do. We need more teachers. There is an epidemic shortage of teachers in this state. And most people aren't aware of that. It has become a significant issue. In the school that I work in, when we have teachers call out, there are days where we don't get substitutes, and that causes classes to be collapsed and things like that, and it is very detrimental to the education of our students. We can't just continue also to throw money at problems. That's a lot of times you'll hear issues of funding, and that is an issue. We talked about that. we also need to look at the root causes of issues in some of our schools.
And thanks, Bob, for recognizing time. I'll turn to you, Jen.
Will you just repeat your question one more time?
Sure. Let me find it. I was already moving on to the next question. Just the pandemic.
Okay, so it cut out again, but I'm pretty sure what you said is Harrisburg supports schools during the pandemic. So in order to make that happen, or in order to know, first, I am actually a certified social studies teacher, and Bob's right, there aren't many of us in Harrisburg, but it's great having educational experience when making decisions. I talk to my school boards and my superintendents on a weekly basis. I'm usually texting them from the House floor when we're voting on bills. So I know what they need when it comes to making decisions. In fact, it was many of them who were upset about the original $300 million gap missing in that first budget vote that Bob mentioned previously. I think what we need to do is, one, we need to provide 5G. There are kids in Pennsylvania who don't have access to technology. That is something that we could fix in the legislature. We need to stop passing unfunded mandates, which is when we tell schools what to do, but we don't provide them with any resources to do so. Our schools are currently doing a lot with too small budgets. We also need to work with our schools to make sure they have all the resources they need to reopen. I know that our kids are better served in the classroom, and I know all of our teachers and administrators want kids back in the classroom. And so I'm hopeful that we did pass a bill today, actually. It's got to go through, I think it has to go through the Senate, but we were able to make it so the Department of Ed secretary can pass some waivers for this year, including with standardized testing. These are all things that were requested, including with teacher certifications. So time's up.
Just give me a wave, or if I've been noted. We're all dealing with these challenges, but let's continue. So hopefully that doesn't happen. We've been talking, and you both have been talking a lot about the budget, and we got a good question about that. So I want to follow up on that. And the question is, given that our revenue stream has been seriously eroded, what sources would you tap to help fund the general fund, and why? Good questions, by the way.
Am I first? I'm sorry.
Oh yes. Sorry. Yes, Bob, you're up.
So first off, that is a really good question. And I'm really happy that someone asked that, because as I've said before, right now, the number one thing facing our communities is the COVID-19 pandemic. But really the second looming challenge that we have on the horizon is the economic issues that we're going to have to deal with as a result of the way that we've decided to combat this pandemic. And so I would be open to looking at a number of different revenue opportunities. I think the clearest option right now is to have our businesses reopened. Not only is what we're doing going to kill a lot of our local economy, but the reason why we don't have any revenue is because we have everything shut down, because the Wolf administration is picking winners and losers here. And it's not based on common sense, data, science, any of that. It's politicized. Okay. And so if we were to open back up, that we wouldn't need to replace much of the revenue that we've lost. I certainly think that we need to get creative and maybe look at some new opportunities that we've in the past looked past. That being said, I would strongly oppose raising taxes right now, especially with the struggle that a lot of our residents are dealing with economically.
Thanks. I'll turn to you, Jen.
Thank you. I wanted to just point out that we don't still have a lockdown. Actually, everything reopened in June with the exception of the restaurant industry. But the issue is that people still aren't going out and shopping and engaging with the economy like they used to, because there is still a fear of catching COVID-19 through community spread. Our economic crisis is bad. We have a $5.5 billion shortfall, which we knew was going to happen, but we just passed that along and now it's due at the end of November. Unfortunately, our rainy day fund only covers 4 days of expenses in Pennsylvania. So we have to look at, one option is we have $1 billion of CARES money left, but we need to work with the federal government to allow us to spend that money. We're also in talks with the treasurer to go out and procure at the state level a private loan, and then the treasurer could help us make sure we can pay off that loan in the future. Unfortunately, though, when this happens, we've seen in the past, when budget decisions get tough, things get cut. And when that happened under Governor Corbett last in 2010, when we faced a budget crisis, education was what paid. And I want to make sure that that does not happen again. And so it really depends on who's making the decisions at the end of this year with what we end up cutting in order to make our budget work. And we have to make sure those our values are included. Thank you.
Thanks. Switch topics now. I know the League is a big supporter of redistricting reform and ending gerrymandering in Pennsylvania. And we've gotten a question here. Do you support redistricting reform and do you favor an independent redistricting commission?
I believe I'm first this time.
Yes.
Yes and yes. I have been a co-sponsor of any bill that I could that would have created a nonpartisan commission to create our districts. And I want people to understand gerrymandering is very much a thing in Pennsylvania. Both parties have been guilty of it, but it's wrong. Voters should choose their politicians. One of the most gerrymandered in Pennsylvania. And you can see it in Radnor, how they have neighborhoods literally where one house is included on one street and their next door neighbor is in a different house district. I've been yelled at by residents from Springfield, the island of Springfield, or the one ward in Marple, of residents who are cut out of my district because they didn't get my mail and they were upset and they didn't understand it's because they don't actually live in my district. We need to make sure we follow the Constitution and that we keep townships contiguous. There is no reason that we have townships cut up in this district. But that is the way it was gerrymandered. We want to make sure after the census is state senate and our congressional maps. In 2018, our maps made national news and they were thrown out because they were deemed unconstitutional. I wasn't there because I was not there until 2018, but we want to make sure that it is a nonpartisan commission drawing the maps. That is the only way it will be fair and the only way that Pennsylvania voters will have true parity.
Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Bob.
I completely support fair redistricting, and I agree with what Representative Omer said about it's something that both parties have been guilty of in the past. I believe that voters should choose their legislators, not the other way around. I would support an independent community commission to give the power back to the people. I do think it's interesting that Representative Omer supports fair redistricting and independent community commission on that when she's taken money from the Democratic Legislative Committee, which is funded by George Soros, which is an organization that supports Democratic candidates who support Democratic redistricting. So that's just another example of the type of thing that's eroding the public trust between the voters and their elected officials when we say one thing and yet we allow money and influence to alter us to do another. And just another issue on the lockdown real quick. I understand we're not in a lockdown still, if that's the terminology, but whatever we want to call it, whatever we're in right now, whatever the phase is, the terminology, there are folks who aren't able to pay their bills because they can't work. Businesses and restaurants and bars who've been vilified for doing their business, right? 50% right now. That's great. Half after 3 or 4 months. Okay. I can't tell that person, it's great to tell them we're not in a lockdown, but they still can't pay their bills. Okay. The reality of the situation is this is very serious for a lot of the people in our local economy. And our local economy, as a first responder and an educator, they're the ones who support us. So we need to be there for them.
Okay, I'm just making sure I did see a hand. Okay. Jen has asked for an additional 30 seconds, just letting the timer know. And Jen, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to acknowledge that.
Oh, Jen, your internet's breaking up.
Devastating time. And when we were getting calls about, can you hear me?
Okay. I'm going to start your 30 seconds now. Maybe just back a little bit. I don't know. I'm not the technical guru here. Go ahead. The 30 seconds starts now.
I was going to say that it has been very devastating. No one chose the pandemic to come here. And we can go back and forth about arguing about the response, but my office jumped into action. We hosted food drives. We delivered almost 20 truckloads of food to food pantries that fed families right here in our communities. We helped collect thousands of dollars of unemployment and fought to get through to the unemployment system for thousands of residents. So I know it hasn't been easy, but I have been doing everything I can in my position to help the residents in our community.
Okay, and Bob, he has asked for his additional 30 seconds. And then remember, as I said, we don't do this back and forth, so that will be the last one.
Right. Yeah. So I appreciate the food drives that Representative Momera has done, some of which I participated in. I think they're great. That's very much what we do here in our district. Lots of those have been happening from folks who aren't even in that position. But the reality of the situation is, if our current representative was doing everything she could to support local businesses, she would have voted to allow those businesses to be open 3 or 4 different times. Instead, she voted no, okay, along with the Wolf administration, picking winners and losers, and put her party above the wants and the needs of the people in this district. And that's problematic because we're saying one thing, but we're doing another.
Okay, so I can't believe it, but we're already through almost an hour. So I'm going to do a closing question, and then we'll get to your closing statements. So the closing question, it is said that people learn from their mistakes, but wise people learn from those mistakes of others. What have you learned from the mistakes of others?
Who's first?
I believe it's you, Jen.
I would say what I learned from the mistakes of others, if we're thinking about politics, it's running negative campaigns. Running negative campaigns, the first presidential election that inspired me to run for office was in 2016, and both parties ran very negative campaigns. And so instead of running where I'm focused on attacking my opponent, I want to focus on what qualifies me. And I think that negative campaigning has led to the divisiveness that has permeated our politics and has really broken our system. And it gets back to, I mean, even in this debate, constantly bringing up bills. And I feel the need to set the record straight. I didn't vote against reopening. There were bills, the Republicans in Harrisburg were trying to reopen in March, April, and May. They were, before public health officials were telling us. We saw what happened in Texas, Florida, New York, California, states that did reopen too early. When we did finally reopen, I think what he's referring to is the emergency have ended the ability for the state, which is a federal law that is required. That's why all 50 states have emergency declarations. So I think it's really important that we stick to the facts and that we know what is, that we put out there what qualifies us, and we stop focusing so much on attack.
Okay, Bob?
Very interesting question. And if I had to learn from a mistake, I'm trying to think of a mistake from others. In the past, mistakes that I have made that I've learned from is that you always go with your gut. That's something that my father instilled in me. And, that's something that I've tried to guide me through my life. And, what my gut tells me right now is that folks are really struggling in this district, either as a result of the virus or the decisions that we've made. And some of those decisions from the Wolf administration in picking winners and losers, our current representative has supported. And I don't mean, listen, I don't mean to be negative. These are facts. Okay. I understand when we talk about voting against ending the emergency declaration, that federal funding has nothing to do with an emergency declaration. That CARES Act money was signed into law and it's guaranteed until December. It's nothing to do with an emergency declaration. We would have received that. We did receive that money. And so when it comes to what my gut tells me, it's that folks need to be represented and they need leadership right now. And we have real problems and we need real solutions. And I hope that we can all come together to work towards those solutions.
All right, thanks, Bob. All right, I can't believe it. We're toward the end of the hour, and I want to make sure you each have your 2 minutes, your allotted 2 minutes. And per the coin toss, I'm going to let Bob go first toward the last. So go ahead, take it away, Bob.
Thank you to everyone who made this debate possible tonight. And I want to thank all of the people who tuned in so that they can make an informed electoral decision. Now more than ever, that is so important. We're at a crossroads in our district and in our state today. We're in the midst of one of the worst health crises in the history of the world. We face a dire economic situation that impacts, the impacts of which we will be faced to deal with for years to come. Many of our communities are more divided now than they've ever been. And our children have been set back almost an entire year in their learning and their social development. In short, we're struggling. The challenges are real and they're severe. But I believe we can overcome all of these challenges. The people in Marple and in Morton and in Springfield and Radnor have proven that they can come together and take care of one another in a time of crisis, as they always have. And that's what we need in Harrisburg. If I receive your support to serve as your next state representative, my votes will reflect the views that I have been instilled in me throughout my life, because that's what our district needs right now: representation. And that's how our government's supposed to work. That's how our democracy should work. When people are in need and you can help them, it's your responsibility to do so. That's what I've always done, both as a volunteer firefighter, as a community volunteer, and as a classroom educator. I've also been a bridge builder and a problem solver, two qualities that we clearly need in Harrisburg right now to break through the partisan gridlock and divisiveness that permeates our nation and our state. Now more than ever, people understand elections have consequences. I have been there for my community my entire life, and I will always be there for my community. We have real problems. We need real solutions and real leadership to solve them. I would be honored to represent the wants and the needs of the people of Marple, Morton, Springfield, and Radnor. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And now we're going to turn to Jen, who won the coin toss, and we'll have the last word, the last 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. And thank you to everyone who tuned in tonight. I believe that I have a proven track record of someone who is going to work hard for you and get things done. I'm one of the few freshman members of the minority party who was ever able to get a bill passed and signed into law in Harrisburg. I have brought millions of dollars back to our district, and I have worked hard to communicate with the residents in this district. I hear all the time folks who say, I've lived here for 30, 40, or 50 years, and I've never had a government official who is so responsive and engaging as you. And that is something you can count on with me. Our country is at a crossroads, and it's important that you have elected officials that you can trust. And even if you don't agree, who you know has your back and who's going to make the right moral decisions, even if they're not politically convenient. And that is something that I'm committed to doing. With me, you know, you will always have honesty, hard work, and an office of people who are excited to see you and excited to work for you. I know that the COVID experience has impacted all of us, each and every one of us. And I'm committed to make sure that we get out of this together and that we make sure everyone in our country and in our district has an opportunity. I always say you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps if you don't have boots to pull up on. And that's something that is important to me. Before getting elected, I worked 3 jobs. I put myself through college, and I never imagined being here. This job has truly been the opportunity of a lifetime, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity that you all have given me over the last 2 years. I hope I can count on your support in November, and I hope everyone, regardless of who you vote for, make sure you're a voter this November. Our country depends on it. Thank you.
All right, great. Well, this is so exciting. And this is really all about the league. The league is bringing people information, nonpartisan, trusted information to inform voters. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. I want to thank the candidates. I know we had a little bit of technical glitches here and there, but the fact is, you got the facts. You heard from the candidates themselves, and that's really what this is all about. It's what the league is about. And you can also read more about the candidates at vote411.org. You can plan your entire ballot. It goes without saying, if you're watching tonight, I hope you're registered. You can check your registration. You can go to votespa.com, as I call it, the vote spa. Go there. It's the only spa you should really be going to right now, or unless there's some COVID things they've got going on, because we want to support our small businesses. I know I went back to the nail salon. But listen, this is really about you. It's about November, but it's not just about November 3rd. It's election season now. We're going to be getting our ballots soon. If you're doing vote by mail, really important, turn to your leagues, turn to your elections office, make sure you get the information about drop boxes, about satellite offices, and everything that's available to you about your polling location. You do you. You want to vote by mail? Great. You want to go in person? Great. Just make sure that you vote. This is such an important election from the top of the ballot on down. That's why we do these down ballot forums, so that you can hear both from Jen and Bob, so that you have an informed vote. This will be recorded. It is recorded, and it will be available to watch in full. It will be on mainline TV. And I want to thank, you can only see us, but there's a whole team behind us right now. And that's Anna Marie, and that's our question coordinator, Anne, who's been moderating the chat, Roberta Winters, the president of the Radnor League, Megan, our timekeeper. So there's a whole slew of us behind the scenes making this happen. Little glitches, but I think it went well, because at the end of the day, it's about you, it's about the voters and informing the public. Remember, your voice is your vote. So thanks for tuning in. Stay safe and stay well during this pandemic. Thanks so much for tuning in.